Is this thing on? All right, Stupid Monkey Philosophy. We're probably going to do a little bit of a series on this moral realism, moral relativism, moral reasoning thing. And I'm just going to read the basic definition to get started. Hello, welcome if you're here. Thanks for joining if you're joining. And if not, whatever. Fuck you can't even hear me anyway. Okay. Moral realism, also called ethical realism, is the theory that there are mind-independent moral facts, and humans can make claims about them that can either be true or false. Moral facts are akin to mathematical facts. They are features of the universe that are discovered rather than created by individuals. So moral realism says that facts, morality is a state of affairs that exists independently of human existence. First published on October 3rd, 2005. Substantive revision, Tuesday, February 3rd, 2015. Moral realism from Stanford.edu. Taken at face value, the claim that Nigel has a moral obligation to keep his promise, like the claim that that Nix is a black cat, purports to report a fact. Is this just starting off in the... Okay, whatever, I'm just gonna... Taken at face value, the claim that Nigel has a moral obligation to keep his promise, like the claim that Nix is a black cat, purports to report a fact and is true if things are as the claim purports. Moral realists are those who think that, in these respects, things should be taken at face value. Moral claims do purport to report facts and are true if they get the facts right. Moreover, they hold at least some moral claims actually are true. That much is the common and more or less defining ground of moral realism, although some accounts of moral realism see it as involving additional commitments, say to the independence of the moral facts from the human thought and practice, or to those facts being objective in some specified way. Those facts being... So, wait. It says involving additional commitments, say to the independence of the moral facts from human thought and practice. Right, so you say they are objective in some specified way. Okay, this is a moral claim. Killing babies is bad, right? Moral statement, objectively bad. Why? Because if we kill babies, less offspring would mature to make more babies. Hence, you would reduce the population. Unless you wanted to reduce the population, that was your objective, right? So it's objectively true that the more babies you kill, the less fertile adults you'll produce. I don't know if you could say is that an amoral statement? It's just an objective statement about populations and deaths. I don't know. Maybe too early. As a result, those who reject moral realism are usefully divided into 1. Those who think that moral claims do not purport to report facts in light of which they are true or false, non-cognitivists. And 2. Those who think that moral claims do carry this purport, but deny that any moral claims are actually true, error theorists. Error theory. Maybe another one to look into. Those who think that moral claims do carry this, but purport... What? Is that proper usage of that word? Report facts. But deny that any moral claims are actually true. Huh. Okay. So I don't see how they're just not contradicting the whole thing. It is noting that while moral realists are united in their cognitivism and in their rejection of error theories, they disagree among themselves not only about which moral claims are actually true, but about what it is about the world that makes those claims true. What it is about the world that makes those claims true. Well, the fact that we share the world, we share experience, makes the claim true, right? If we did not share experience, and some people would say, okay, well, we can't even prove that, right? You might just be imagining this whole frickin' scenario. All these people might be, androids or something. I don't know. Unless you cut one of them open, then you'll find out. Moral realism is not a particular... Don't cut people open. I'm not advocating for that. It was a joke. It's a demented joke. Moral realism is not a particular substantive moral view, nor does it carry a distinctive metaphysical commitment over and above the commitment that comes with thinking moral claims can be true or false, and some are true. Wait. A commitment that comes with thinking moral claims can be true or false, and some are true. Right. Okay. I don't tacitly agree there. A metaphysical commitment over and above the commitment that comes. I just don't... It seems you would be making a metaphysical claim here, right? You're saying... in order for... Like, talking about facts being objective in reality is a metaphysical claim, right? Like, because you're talking about something that hypothetically exists independently of you. So you have to take the I out of the whole freaking equation. I don't know. Okay. Still, much of the debate about moral realism revolves around either what it takes for claims to be true or false at all, right? With some arguing that moral claims do not have what it takes, or what it would take specifically for moral claims to be true, with some arguing that moral claims would require something the world does not provide. Well, it depends on what you're talking about with moral claims, because there's really easy ones, like killing is bad. Like, in every sense, we can find examples where there are negative impacts, overarching, like anytime you kill a thing, especially if it's like not necessary for your sustenance, right? And then you add another factor in, right? But if you just kill the thing just for the sake of killing the thing, it's objectively bad, right? It's bad for that thing. It's bad for you as a human being. And we could say that is true. Look at the psychological ramifications even to you. In most cases, the person, even who has to kill in self-defense, usually experiences some level of trauma from the act of killing as well, right? Unless they have some type of like deep psychopathy or something. So that's my take on that from the stupid psychologist perspective. My tooth is starting to flare up again. I was contemplating killing the stream, but it's only been like 8.5 minutes. We'll give it a few more minutes and finish this article. Continued. The debate between moral realists and anti-realists assumes, though, that there is a shared object of inquiry. In this case, a range of claims all involved are willing to recognize as moral claims, right, about which two questions can be raised and answered. Do these claims report facts in light of which they are true or false? Are some of them true? Moral realists answer yes to both. Non-cognitivist answer no to the first, and by default, no to the second, while error theorists say yes to the first, but no to the second. With the introduction of minimalism about truth and facts, I consider myself a minimalist as well, things become a bit more complicated. Introduction of minimalism about truth and facts, things become more complicated. See the section on semantics below. I repeated the beginning of the first. Okay. To note that some other non-moral claims do not or do purport to report facts, or that none or some of them are true, is to change the subject. Right. Exactly. Are there some objective moral facts or not? You gotta say yes or no. Doesn't matter which ones you're talking about, are some of them objective? Okay. That said, it is strikingly hard to nail down with any accuracy just which claims count as moral, and so are at issue in the debate. For the most part, those concerned with whether moral realism is true are forced to work back and forth between the intuitive grasp of which claims are at issue and an articulate but controversial account of what they have in common, such that realism either is or is not defensible about them. By all accounts, moral realism can fairly claim to have common sense and initial appearances on its side. That advantage, however, might be easily outweighed. There are a number of powerful arguments for holding that it is a mistake to think of moral claims as true. I think the crux of it there is that you can tug at any particular individual's, proverbial moral heartstrings, right? Once you find that, it can be dead babies, abusing children, wherever that thing lies, you'd be like, is this thing really wrong? It's universally wrong for anything to do this, anyone to do this, right? And then they got to be like, well, yeah. Why? Why is there? Well, it's a cultural thing. It's a social thing. No, it's you're just trying to dial it back. You're trying to. It's like, why is it a cultural or social thing? Like, understand that many people have these impulses, and most people do not act on them. The fact that some moral actors do makes everybody else peel back in terror and in disbelief, right? Because you realize the ramifications of the action. You have to have the power to contemplate to even be a moral actor, right? If you can't contemplate, you're not a moral actor. We all contemplate, therefore we are all moral actors. It seems pretty basic to me, right? And it was thought, back, not so long ago that that animals and insects and birds and bees could not contemplate. And now it's probably true that that's, not necessarily the case in most cases, right? Like most animals probably contemplate in some fashion, not exactly as we do, but they in order to have their particular skill set, biologically, their brains have to be sufficiently evolved to have a skill that they contemplate information. Hey, Pixie, good to see you. I'm trying to philosophize here. I got if you want to come in, you may. So moral realism, it's saying morality is real. It's real. It's objectively real. Really, in real life. I think I can jive with that. All right. So, in contrast to moral relativism, it would be morally wrong for Susan to have an abortion if Susan believed that abortion is always morally wrong. It would also be morally wrong, according to relativists, if Susan had an abortion when she believed that it was wrong for only her to have one. What? I don't like that one. Where is this from? I'm going to go back to Stanford. We'll just do a new search. So I'm trying to find out why people really disagree about this at all. Are there? I think, I guess I'm a moral realist. There are objectively true moral facts. I don't see how there cannot be. And it's true for, in the example of killing the young. It's true in any culture, in any. How you doing, Thunder Dwarf?
Good. Please continue.
Yeah, I don't see how you could say that it's not bad for any particular species to kill their young. That is objectively, it's immoral in the fact that it harms the young, and in the fact that it harms the species as a whole, and you will have less successful reproductive adults as a result.
Mm, yes and no. I mean, that's true if you look at it with any sort of emotion, right? But if I were to take emotion out of it, and this is going to make me sound like a very cold person, this is not what I believe. I'm just, other side of the coin here. If you take emotion out of it, right, culling the herd is not necessarily a bad thing. You are going to have less productive adults, but you're going to have a more cohesive herd, particularly if if the young being killed is the weaker one, the runt, sick, or deformed, because you're saving future generations from incurring from the likelihood of the same deformity or the same weakness, and you're also not taking resources away from the healthy pack.
Right. Well, but we have additional factors like piled on there. And that's where I kind of drew the line. Okay, you could just say this thing is objectively bad if you don't add all the additional factors, right? Like, and then once you start compounding on the factors, of this is a weaker member of the species. They're going to take resources from the other one. We don't have the excess of resources. Well, then you've added all these additional factors, right? But when you strip it back to the act in of itself for its own sake, right, without adding any of those additional factors, then you could say, oh no, that would be objectively bad for that thing unless this other thing.
Okay, so a more appropriate example would be like eagles, right? Where they'll attack the nest or eat the young of other eagles to ensure the dominance of their own genetic line.
But is it not the case that eagles just don't realize that they're not really in competition? That's bad for their species overall, right? Because eagles they are actually diminishing in population, probably in some part because of that, additionally to other, external factors. But they're diminishing their own population on top of the external factors. That's why eagles aren't the dominant birds in the sky, right?
Well, that's true. Which is, I mean, I guess something's got to hold them back because they're actually incredibly stealthy. I mean, even the way the females test the males before mating.
Right.
Dropping the sticks.
I think you could draw that comparison between humans and birds too. There's a lot more of that. There's a lot more competition. Like apes and birds share that in common. The mating selection process, which is much more male dominated in other species. We don't see it that way, but it's actually more female dominated in a lot of ways, I think. But that's not
on morality. Especially nowadays.
It's just an observation. Yeah, especially now. Oh, how you doing today? We just jumped into that. You doing well?
I am. Just getting some work done. Had to work on a Saturday. Not happy about it, but getting through it.
Oh, got you. I have to work every Saturday now, so I give up my Saturday nights. But, it's a trade-off, and hopefully it's temporary.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
So what do you think separates humans from the rest of animals? I have my own theory.
I do believe we probably have some higher level of intelligence in some areas than most animals, although probably not as much as we tend to give ourselves credit for, like tool making and stuff like that. If you believe in evolution, we can see evidence that other animals are using tools out there now, and they have been for quite some time. And if you place that on an evolutionary time scale, they're really just slightly behind us, not very far.
My favorite theory so far is that the thing that separates us from the rest of the animal kingdom seems to be our collective ability to believe in fiction. And to imagine things outside of reality. Like they use tools, right? But they use tools from what's there. They're not creating new tools, right? They clearly have emotion and language and all of that. But like if I gave an ape a banana, he might give me a coconut. But if I gave him a piece of paper, he would think I was stupid. He might hit me in the head with the coconut, you know, like it's meaningless. But we accept this has value because we collectively believe it has value, right?
Well, right, but that's just an evolutionary step, right? Like humans did that for a long time. They have evidence that we just kind of took the bare essentials that we found. You can find stones that are sharp and use them to cut things. You can find sticks that are pointy and use them to stab things, which is the level that these creatures are at now. And it's only a matter of taking that next step until, I can I can draw a figure, and that figure can be interpreted by other individuals to mean a thing, and then we have the pretext to writing and speaking, a written and spoken language and things like that is universally understood, or at least generally understood, right? Then that's just another step, and then you have another step in that where we can communicate with these creatures, and we can find a common language even between us and them, but that's a step in both their and our collective evolution. Right, so those species have to evolve to the point that we're at now to even get there.
I think it would be pretty necessary for our species to evolve that first for survival alone, because without it, we are pretty weak, hardly any kind of dominant species, even in the primate family alone.
Right. Well, and there are instances where now we are so far removed from nature that it's actually more difficult for us to communicate. In some ways, we're less intuitive. Like, this is why people get like mauled by bears and things like that. Whereas, a few generations ago, people would have been more in tune with, this is bear country. And, my grandfather saw a bear out here. And now that we've, nearly extincted them in North America, at least, it's like, nobody worries about bears. So it's like this grand thing when somebody gets killed by a bear because they were, basically walking through its neck of the woods, like.
We're pretty awful that way in some respects.
Yeah, it seems like for the ones that have the whole history of oral tradition and now written language, people are less inclined to read and learn history, and so it's like we have a shorter memory, a shorter attention span as a species now, I think, which is kind of a weird paradox, the fact that we have so much information.
Well, our ingenuity is something to marvel at, but it's also like it's made things easier and convenient and safer, but at the same time, I think it's also like just as destructive. Does that make sense? It seems to be our ingenuity seems to be a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
That we cannot help but hurt ourselves with.
So where are you falling on the spectrum of the moral realism, moral relativism, or do you have like a hard position on that?
I think morality is a concept born of necessity and survival, right? And I think it is subjective. I think if you can agree on what subjective goal you have, you can find objective means to getting to that goal. But I don't think morality itself is objective. I think there's too many gray areas. And I think it was something born, like I said, of necessity and survival, right? Like we're social creatures, and you have to, and there's safety in numbers. And so you build these communities, and in these communities, these agreements have to be made, or these communities can't exist, right? And so while it may be convenient for me and easier for me to go steal from Joe, I don't want Jason over there stealing my shit, right? And so because I don't want people stealing my shit, I can't steal their shit. And so it's almost like even in altruism, there's some sort of self-interest there, right? Be it for your safety or the safety of your property or things like that. And I think these things naturally arise in social structures. But it's hard for me to say that there's any sort of objective outline to it, because for it to be objective, I would expect it to be much more similar in different places. Yeah, we all have the base, like, you shouldn't kill people, but that speaks to, you know, survival, and we all have this proclivity and this drive for survival alone. So I wouldn't call that like moral, really. It's just one of those goals we agree on. Life is good. I like to breathe, you know. But if you look at what the difference between a killing and a murder is, that is vastly different in different societies. And so that just seems more evidence for something wholly subjective.
So, all right, one could say, in the context of being a social species, like, which I think most mammals are considered as social creatures, right? So, in that context, you'd say that morality is an evolutionary advantage that is adopted by those species, as an adaptation that comes with, like, cognition, right? Like, you have to be cognizant of the other person, able to make an agreement with them. They have to be, so there has to be this thing where you can communicate, make an agreement, and then keep it for any length of time in order for it to be effective. And then it's a form of like a meme, right? Like a Richard Dawkins meme. It's like an adaptation that takes place by mental processes rather than physical ones in social species. Okay. So, and so if we're saying that, then we'd have to say that, at least in this context, when we're talking about it's objectively true outside of human experience, right? We can't really speak to things outside of human experience other than, inferring that they exist. So if we're still saying that there are other social creatures, they share this trait, and it's possible they could evolve this trait to our level. So that's why I'm still just falling on this moral realism side. There have to be some objective facts about morality that we're talking about, and we can say they're pretty much universal to every species that shares them. Maybe some species don't share them, right? But every species that does share them shares a similar quality, a similar trait in their morality. And usually it's to the advantage of that species, right? Like there's something about it, some objective.
Sometimes it's only an advantage to a particular sect of the species, right? Sometimes it's only an advantage to your little niche and not to the entire species as a whole. And that's why I say I have trouble thinking of it as anything objective, right? Like, you can say that we all universally have this respect for life, or this idea that murder is wrong. And that's true. But again, I think that's more survival instinct than anything moral, right? Like, we don't want people going around killing because we don't want to be killed. It is what it is. But what that line is between what constitutes a killing and what constitutes a murder, I mean, what constitutes a justified killing, like self-defense or honor killings or whatever, and what constitutes actual murder, this thing we all agree is bad, is vastly different from one society to the next. And because it's so vastly different, despite our agreement on this one thing, we like survival, it seems it can't be very objective.
I think that even in those instances, like, there's a second layer of morality, right? So you have the basic, well, most people don't want to be killed, and they don't want to kill. It's kind of an instinct. There's an innate trait there, but in the sense of like we're talking about like honor killings. Usually, when you do those, it's because there's a second layer of morality. They think this thing's wrong, or it's going to cause social degeneration or something like that. And so, in their mind, by killing this one person, that's their form of culling the herd. They see that as a weak participant, even if their their standard for what makes that person weak is possibly flawed. Right? That's a different type of
right. But there's such a big difference between calling the herd as acceptable and justifiable and even righteous, and that person is not deserving of death, right? Like there's a very big difference between those two moral stances, even though we're generally addressing the same respect of life issue, even though we're addressing that one murder, killing is bad issue, right? What makes a killing allowable and not murder is so vastly different between societies. And yeah, there's religious influences and cultural influences and all these other influences, right? But I think that's why it is subjective, because no matter what your moral compass is, it's something collected as we grow up and defined as we grow up. And I think like because of that, because it seems really subjective.
Well, again, though, we have the objective law or the objective fact, we'd call it, right, is that killing is bad, and there's always this contingency. Killing is bad unless, and the fact that varies from culture to culture doesn't say that killing isn't bad.
Okay, but I think that's where we differ. I don't think the thing we agree on is killing is bad. I don't think that's what we agree on. I think that's a byproduct of agreeing on survival is good. Now, how you define that survival defines a lot about your moral compass. Is survival for your belief system? Is it survival for your religious views? Is it survival for your race or your country? Or is it your species? Is it to the detriment of another? Is it okay to wipe out another group of people to ensure your group gets through? Like all these different things are different because we don't necessarily agree killing is bad. We justify it in many different ways. I think what we agree on is I want to survive.
That's interesting. So, okay, wait. So the positive claim, the truth claim, right, is that survival is good for each individual, any collective like group, right? So the moral aspect of it, I guess, was like, what is the antithesis to that, right? If we say that survival is good unless this, and then we include killing, is that, you think, what we're talking about when we talk about morality? When is it okay for something not to survive, like for us to cause it?
I think your moral compass, right, is laid out in how you perceive the things that you do agree on, right? Like I said, we all want to survive. Survival is good. A byproduct of that is what ceases survival? Well, killing, and I don't want people killing me, and I don't want people to think it's okay to kill, right? So, but what does killing people look like? To me, that's ending another person's life. To somebody else, it's only murder if it's not self-defense, or if they didn't break the law, or if they didn't break your religious customs, or if they believe the same thing you believe, or any number of things, right? And so I can't say we collectively agree on this, that this thing is bad, when we seem to bend over backwards justifying this thing in different ways. In each culture, we all have a different line.
Do you think that's true with animals as well? Is there different? Do you see? I mean, neither of us, I think, are like,
I do.
Can't remember the term right now, but
I do. Well, I can't say all animals because I haven't studied them all in depth, right? But if we look at other primates, I would say that's true. The standards, what somebody can get away with in what one ape can get away with in one colony, he may not be able to get away with in another colony, right? There are some that are considered so inappropriate amongst their own kind that they're not really welcome in any colony. There is a difference, though, between the apes that are ejected from the colonies and the apes that are killed, right? And something that can get you ejected from one colony can get you killed in another colony, right? And so even in other primates, they seem, it doesn't seem to match exactly. You can find similarities, you can find patterns, and I would expect to, they're the same species, but there's still some sort of filter there.
Well, then we'd have to say that, again, going back to that, this morality is a trait that's going to be inherent in any social species, right? I mean, it has to be there in order for the system to work. Now, it doesn't have to be the same, like amongst the species, but there has to be some system.
Yes, but the systems that last, or at least in the human species, perhaps not in the animal kingdom or other primates, but in the human species, the guiding compass that seems to last the longest tends to be fluid rather than fixed, right? Like, for the same reasons that our the people who wrote the Constitution put in there, hey, like every 10 years or so, you guys should have a meeting about maybe updating this, right? Because they knew it would have to change. It wasn't going to be good enough forever. And so even though it's required for a society to work, it's almost required that it be fluid and not fixed.
I like making that comparison too, because I'm a staunch believer that there are parts of the Constitution that should probably be changed that haven't, for reasons that are mind-boggling to me. Like just even in the preamble, just with nature and nature's God or something like that. It's like, whoa, man! It's like, and then there are parts of it that could be clearer, and at least you could use modernized language so that more people understood it better. Like, and we haven't even done that. It's been 200 years. Like,
well, there's a reason we haven't done that, right? And I happen to be disillusioned with both sides. I don't belong to either party. I think they're both shit. So, but okay, like, it's in the way they flip flop, right? Like, business rights are good when the gay couple can't get a cake from the bakery, but all of a sudden, business rights are bad when Trump dude who was threatening other customers gets kicked out, right? And both sides do it. But they do the same thing with legislation and with the laws, and so do our courts. Our courts are really bad about it too, especially like with the reinterpretation of the 14th Amendment, right? And so it started very early, this whole debate between the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. But the reason they're not changing it is because each side can interpret it in their favor. And so it makes them look good to take that piece of Constitution and be like, our forefathers, because it is so open that each side can make an argument from the same thing.
Right. So on that note, are you in favor of more federal power or less, like more power to the states themselves?
I think it depends on the subject. Right? I don't think it's a whole cloth thing. And I'm the kind of person who makes every political party pissed off at me, so it is what it is. But the federal government is supposed to be the protection of life, liberty, and property, right? They should obviously have things like interstate trade and things like that, just to keep it cohesive. And and working for the people. The last thing we need is a farming state and a textile state going at each other, and both populations being like, I don't have half the shit I need, right? So that the federal government should obviously have. The federal government should be able to defend us. And sometimes that means taxation, and people don't like that, and it is what it is. When you get into the protection of liberty and property, it starts getting dicey, right? Like, where do you draw that line? And so I think those are things that have to be explored, like, on a case-by-case basis. But do I think that states' rights, here's my problem. My one problem with people who say that the federal government should have less power and that states should have more power is that in a lot of cases, they're actually arguing for more government and they don't realize it, right? Because you can repeal one federal law and your state, because that law has been repealed, your particular state can now address that one issue with 5 brand new laws, right? And so now you actually have more governmental implications in your life. And so I don't think the argument should be federal power versus state power, but am I arguing for more government or not?
The other thing that I find interesting is that, we have the freedom to travel, right, amongst the states, and yet there's not any obligation on the state to inform us when, like, certain things are prohibited in one state, and you just came from a state where it was allowed, right? And so, at the very least, if you have the freedom to travel, then the information should be, like, publicly available to say, oh, if you cross these state lines with this thing that was legal in this state, and some places they do that. Like, TSA is good about that. Like, when I was on the plane, they were like, we know you're coming from California, but don't bring pot on the plane. They're very explicit in it, but it's not always like that. And there are cases where people will get caught up in the system, in the prison system and things, or the justice system, where they are completely ignorant of the fact that the law differs in this other state from where they just came.
Right. But if the federal government came in and said, hey, like, on a federal level, we don't consider it illegal. So if your state considers it illegal, that's fine, right? Like, don't sell it. But you don't get to harass people from out of state for doing something legal to them, right?
Right.
Like, you don't get to take away their freedom. Give them a fine, whatever, a warning, but you don't get to. This is not an arrestable offense. Then each state could have their own laws, but it's not to the detriment of the people.
Right.
Right. And so that's why I say, like, federal government isn't always bad. It's, am I arguing for more government interference in my life or less government interference in my life? Because, to be honest with you, I don't give a fuck if it comes from the state or the federal government. It's not better because it comes from the state.
Well, that could, like, I prefer to live in this state because of its laws or the lack thereof sometimes. Like, they don't have, like, I've heard of some ludicrous laws in southern states that I think are completely nuts, right? So I'm like, oh, I wouldn't want to move there just for that reason. But, is that's just like, our preference, right? It's not something that we could say, well, I prefer to live here because, I prefer to live in this neighborhood because it's gentrified, for example, right? Like, while many people might disagree with that statement, it still should be an option available to that person. It's kind of.
Yeah, I'm not saying that, they can't be penalized. You should be able to fine them, whatever. Don't do that here, not in this state, whatever. But it shouldn't be an arrestable offense, right? Like, then they have the option of having that community if they want. and you have the option of freely traveling without unknowingly putting your freedom at risk.
Okay. And I think, I think freedom of travel is also one of the most contentious, because then there's like, I always said, well, if you have just the freedom of travel, you should be able to just operate a vehicle. Why is it, this whole system where you have to get a driver's license and maintain it and registration and all this stuff? It's just a
The
ploy by the
problem is,
state to get money, right?
I agree with that. The problem is freedom to travel was established before automobiles existed. And so by travel, we cannot infer that they meant the convenience of an automobile, right?
Right. And
So,
then there's the issue of safety, building and maintaining roadways. All of that has to go into it, right? So once we add all those additional factors, you're like, okay, we can restrict automobiles to the people who can afford to, or the people who are able to comply with certain regulations, right? I don't know about vehicle registration. That seems like more of a legal issue, to where they want to be able to track you down if something happens with your vehicle.
perhaps, or it could be born out of something stupid, like that might be why you have to pay to register your vehicle. But it could be born of something stupid, like somebody reported their car stolen, but they couldn't prove it was their car, right?
Right. Well, I mean, and that makes sense. Like, if you don't have a way of identifying, some guy could just take your car and be like, "Nope, that was mine." And then I guess you could, it boiled down to receipts at that point. Who has a receipt for the car? But that's the only way you'd be able to really track that. But like, I don't know. I think a one-time registration on the vehicle makes sense. But the whole, well, over here it's like every 2 years or something like that. You have to renew.
I have to register.
You have to re-register every year, but you have to smog every other year in California.
I have to register, and I have to re-register and get my car inspected every year.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's dumb.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the smogging, at least here, it's an environmental restriction, another additional component. And I go, okay, so on some level, this does make sense, but, maybe the price seems exorbitant. I don't know. To my mind.
Well, I think rather than penalizing the driver, they should be penalizing the car companies.
Yeah, absolutely. We're moving towards that, at least here. So a lot of people think it's, liberal commie shit, but
yeah, wanting to breathe. How woke.
Oh yeah, wokeness.
Oh my God, that chat yesterday.
It was ridiculous.
Not only was it ridiculous, I just think, and I hate to say this, people are going to be mad at me, whatever, okay. It's not going to be the first time. I don't think I've been so disappointed in so many people. In quite a while. Yeah.
I was even disappointed in myself. And I found out that Oz is not of mixed race, which I was like, oops, foot and mouth. No.
I am definitely mixed. I'm fucking everything almost, according to my DNA results. I am half the fucking globe. So
I've been wanting to do that for a while. I should. I think I've got every type of European descent in me or something at least, and probably more that I don't know about.
Oh, there was so much I didn't know about. And yours would be even more accurate than mine, because I'm a female, and so they can only use my maternal haplogroup. But you'll have a maternal and a paternal haplogroup because you have a Y chromosome.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, they can interpret yours from both parents. They only have one with me because I have no Y chromosome to factor in. Okay. But also, it's really cool because they'll tell you, we can't tell you all of your ancestry. We can tell you what part of your ancestry contributed to your specific DNA makeup, which is why my results differ from my siblings' results, right? And so there was so much I didn't know. Like I knew we were obviously British. I definitely knew we had German. That was so obvious. So I knew we had German and British and Irish, and Native American. I knew we had those. And I knew that I had Middle Eastern. I didn't know it was in the Iran area. But like I had no idea that had Iberian and Sardinian and Ashkenazi Jewish and like all this other stuff. French, I mean, all kinds of stuff. I was like, what?
Yeah, I think what they say the earliest with non-melanated European ancestors, right? Like what we consider modern European people came from Assyrian people, which was like Iraq, Iran, right? Something like that. Hopefully
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Which is interesting. So we would all white people would have some trace of, which is
Middle Eastern,
ironic.
yeah. I just wasn't expecting. Well, the people don't understand that's what Caucasian means. Caucasian means like from the Caucasus Mountains, right? And it's so funny because they'll look at somebody with like darker skin than us, and they'll be like, "Oh, that person's not Caucasian." No, they're Caucasian. They're more Caucasian than you. Some of the Middle Eastern people, you know.
Yeah, and I was watching a stream recently too, where they were talking about that, how more people have been just broadly labeled as Caucasians when they're not even actually. Some of them aren't even like people from Norse people, right? Are not Caucasian. They've been labeled as Caucasians because they're white, but they're
exactly.
A lot of them aren't.
Yeah, exactly. My husband's family is that way. They're pure Northern European. Like, of course he's mixed. There's no such thing as a pure bloodline. But when I say pure Northern European, I mean Scottish is the furthest south his bloodline goes, right? He has some Scottish, he has some English, and he has a shit ton of Norwegian and Swedish. And so he is very, very Northern European. And like people will be like, you're Caucasian. And I'm like, no, he's not Caucasian. He's white. He's not Caucasian.
Yeah, there's no checkbox for that one on the self-reporting. It doesn't say white, not Caucasian. It says Caucasian or white, I think is the way they word it sometimes if it's halfway intelligent.
Yeah. It just cracked me up. I was like, but he's not Caucasian at all. Interestingly, I've noticed a trend. If you take 23andMe, it'll also tell you your Neanderthal indicators. And the more European the bloodline seems to be in the DNA mix, the more Neanderthal indicators people seem to have.
That which is kind of opposite of what they used to say, right? They used to think that.
Yeah. Well, I guess they've proven that like Native Americans, and a couple of other groups are actually more closely linked to Denisovans than to the Neanderthals.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So, and that could have, I mean, potentially, you'd say that the Neanderthals were more prone to settle, right? To start settlements, whereas the Denisovans would have been more prone to kind of traveling because they're a little bit more spread about, I think. Like,
see, I would have put that opposite. Opposite. Yeah. Well, I would say, okay, they might tend to be more nomadic. Some of them weren't. There were certain tribes that were fixed, and the most nomadic they got was like the hunters would follow the herd during hunting season and then come back to the establishment, right? So some of them were fixed, some of them were nomadic, but I would say that those prone to wander more would be the Neanderthals, because that seems to have ended up in the bloodline that was very fond of spreading and conquering. And how else would they have done that? Right? Like, it's so heavy across the world. Like, even as mixed as my blood is, I have Neanderthal blood, right? Not nearly as much as my husband does, but I have Neanderthal indicators in my DNA. I mean, that seemed to be so far reaching that I would say they tended to wander a lot. They may like wander and settle, and then the next generation wander and settle, but they seem to be less fond of having a home base and more fond of establishing a home base.
Right. And it's also much of a more, I think, what maybe you say, patriarchal or male centric or male dominated society, right? Like,
Possibly, yeah. But I think that happened even in some of the Denisovan cultures, right? And naturally so. Women are physically weaker. We just are. But there were a lot of maternal or matriarchal societies as well in tribal people. I think there was actually a European matriarchal society at one point, or a Caucasian one, at least. And so there's even a African matriarchal society. So I don't know. I don't know what the difference between the two perspectives was.
It doesn't seem to be a genetic difference, though.
I will say that prior to DNA testing, a matrilineal society seems more natural. Perhaps it was to lessen contention, right? Because if you're in a patriarchal society, right, especially an early patriarchal society where only men could inherit and things like that, it was incredibly important to be able to trust that that kid was your kid. Hence all the jealousy and the demands of purity put on women, and like these strict punishments for not meeting these purities, right? You had to be absolutely sure. But at the same time, he could write off his bastards, right? But in a matriarchal society, you know who your mom is. She birthed you. There's no questions.
I also have to think, I mean, maybe way too far afield, but there's probably some element to it where until you have the information, until you do inbreeding, you don't know that inbreeding is bad, right? Some could say that's an instinct. I think it's probably more learned over time, because it seems to me that without the knowledge of the negative effects of inbreeding, it would be more preferable for a female to try to mate with her male offspring, especially if the dominant male she's been mating with happens to be, kind of, unavailable or even possibly abusive in some way, right? And we could see this happening in kind of unformed, in like natural groups, right? Where we don't have societies yet. We don't have all the knowledge we do now. And it seems then the dominant male would have to learn that he's going to have to, kind of appeal to this female rather than just breed with her and leave her with the baby, right? He's going to have to appeal to her emotional states, like, in order to keep that from happening as well. If that makes any sense, like.
Would it be natural though? I mean, like it may be advantageous for her, but would it be advantageous for the species or the next generation or even the son, right? Because she's aged too, which means her offspring would be less viable. Even her viability for having kids would be less viable, right? And so maybe the natural aversion started from the other side.
That's possible. I don't know. Yeah, that's kind of an interesting aspect. A lot of people don't, talk too much about that because, naughty subject matter. I'm just like, but, there's definitely plenty of evidence of it happening. And then somehow, for a long period of time, we thought, well, kissing cousins is the way to go. And eugenics was involved and stuff, but there's like a long process leading up to the knowledge we have now regarding incest and stuff like that. So it's like,
well, that and monarchies and hierarchies, right? This idea of keeping a pure bloodline.
Yeah. And it seems like more diversity tends to be favorable. I don't know, in my opinion. That's what I've gathered.
Yes, but it wouldn't be the first time somebody's religious sensibilities overrode their common sense.
Common sense ain't so common. No. All right. Well, 1 hour. I appreciate you coming by. I wasn't expecting a guest. So this conversation. Is this morally real? I don't know. But, do you have any final thoughts before we end the show, Thunderdwarf?
No, I've had fun. Thank you for letting me come in. It's been an interesting conversation.
Excellent. Yeah, I enjoyed it thoroughly. Well, all right. As I always say, be well, stay trusty, try not to be a stupid monkey.
Later, Dave.
Later.